Okay, so today we're gonna talk about blending. I'm just really having a hard time. Today is a terrible day in the history of our country again, and I just want to say that I hope everybody out there does what they can do to change things. I live in North Carolina. I want to ask Senators Tillis and Burr to do something. Don't just sit there. Each of them got, I think $6.5 and $4.5 million respectively in donations from the NRA when they were running for Senate again in 2019 for the 2020 elections. 90% of the people in this country want some kind of gun reform. So please make it happen. I lived in Newtown when I was a kid. I went to kindergarten in Newtown. Could have been me in that classroom in 1980. And now here we are in Texas, same deal. It's just ridiculous. So I know this content is archived. I know that this is just for the live audience. I just want to say something up front and say that I'm really devastated. I want to say sorry and send my thoughts to all these families in Texas who lost babies today. I'm sorry, everybody. I'm sorry about this. My kids are in school right now. They're just in school, and anybody could just walk in with a gun. It's merely messed up. Okay. I'm sorry. I gotta get it together. Okay, so let's do it. Okay. All right, I know you didn't come to watch the show for this, so I apologize to everybody. We are going to talk about how to blend when you're painting today. Digital painting, how to blend. And there are 4 ways to do it. And I want to show you all 4 ways. And it's really simple. And sometimes people don't know about these options. So I want to show you a couple of them that might be surprising to you, like mixer brushes and color dynamics. We're going to start, though, with the most basic way that digital artists blend when they paint. So let's do it. All right. The most important thing is you have to have brushes that respond to your your pressure sensitivity. And so what I mean by that is I'm using a stylus. I'm using a Wacom Cintiq, and it's pronounced Wacom. I know that a lot of people say Wacom and Wacom, and I'm sure the company doesn't mind what you say, but I'm just here to let you know that I learned that for the first time after using their products for 20 years. When I visited their offices in Portland, and I walked in and said, "It's great to be here at Wacom." And they said, "It's actually pronounced Wacom." But anyway, if I use a brush that has some sensitivity for the pressure that I'm using, in other words, the opacity might change or the flow or maybe both based on how much pen pressure I'm using, then you can do what is the most commonly used way of blending your colors, blending your paints, and that is to simply do the following. So let me first select, we're going to start with really dead simple stuff here. I'm not even going to use a fancy brush. I'm going to come down to let's see here, a default Photoshop brush like this hard round opacity brush. All right, now let's just see what happens with heavy pressure and then with light pressure, okay? And you can see that with heavy pressure I get full opacity, and with light pressure I get less. if I grab another color, this is the way you do it. This is so easy. You just start with that heavy pressure over here on the left and start to move in with less pressure as you move to the right. And then what you've done now is you painted two colors, and they are now overlapping each other, and there's some transparency there because you were using less pressure when you drew with them. And if you want to ensure that this is what's happening with any brush, if you look at your brush settings panel here, under transfer, you have opacity. And by the way, this is confusing to everybody, and I totally feel your pain, where it says opacity jitter and flow jitter. What should have been done when these panels were designed, and no offense to the engineers who did this 20 some odd years ago, but we should have had, you'll notice there's a very thin and sometimes a little hard to see dividing line between this section of your brush settings panel and this section. And what should have been done was this should have said opacity as sort of like a header for this section, under which we would have an opacity jitter slider. Instead, what we have is we just jump you right into opacity jitter. This is a little confusing. Basically, this area is where you're controlling how your brush will respond, or rather will behave, excuse me, with regards to the opacity. This section is with regards to the flow, okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to set this at a minimum value of 0%, and the control is set to pen pressure. What this means is the lightest amount of color I can possibly get is none at all, basically, okay? 0% opacity, right? The most I can get out of it is 100, and that's always going to be the case unless I were to set some kind of a ceiling for opacity, which I would do up here, okay, in my tool settings. Here are all your tools. This panel always represents the settings for whichever tool you have selected. Now, I always leave my opacity setting at 100 because I like to always be able to ramp up to what I need when I'm painting. If I wanted full opacity for painting, I want to be able to do that. There are some instances where you would want to have a ceiling for opacity, okay? I've never encountered these, but I'm sure they exist. So just so you know, you do have that higher level of control at that location right there. All right, now another thing is that you have this little option right here that you can toggle on and off. If you were to toggle this on and off, okay, with your brush, it's going to allow what's called buildup to occur. And I'll show you what that is here. See this little check mark by buildup? If you've ever used an airbrush in real life, and I doubt many of you have because they are quite outdated, outmoded. But one of the things that was exciting about using airbrushes back when they first came out was this ability to just leave the spray nozzle in front of an area and apply consistent pressure with the airbrush to allow paint to build up in an area and to either spread out or just to get darker. And this is what we allow you to do in Photoshop. Now, with Fresco, we don't yet have a way to use buildup, and that's something that we're looking into. It has to do with the fact that there's no hover state, and there's some other factors involved there. But basically what that means is, and I'll grab a darker color so you can see this more clearly, I'm just going to touch the surface of the tablet, and as I let it sit there, notice what's happening. The paint is slowly darkening up to 100, and there it goes. If I just touch for a moment like this, and then touch like this, and then touch once, you can see that I get these various degrees of opacity simply by leaving it there for either a longer time or a shorter period of time, okay? All right, now, we have our settings correct. We're using a basic round brush, nothing fancy. Here's what you do next. Because you've overlapped one area of color with another, okay, all you have to do is tap on any one of these new colors that you have selected using your eyedropper tool. If you want to paint efficiently, please learn to use your keyboard. The Option key, okay, on a Mac, or the Alt key on a PC. is what's going to temporarily call up your eyedropper tool when you're using the brush tool. All right. So by doing this, I am temporarily calling up the eyedropper tool. I'm tapping with my stylus and I'm selecting that color, and there it is. Okay. Now, by tapping this color, I can use light pressure and just kind of paint over this area here. Okay. Then I can select a color that's a little closer to the yellow. Paint that again. Grab the yellow again, pull in this way, and back and forth. So it's a ton of selecting and painting, selecting and painting. And I'm using light pressure all the way through. Okay? And you see what begins to happen, right? I'll zoom in there. You start to get a blend between these two areas. Now, if we make a little selection here, okay, and get rid of everything on the outside of it, sorry, Command-Shift-I will invert my selection. Now you can see the result of that work we just did. Okay, we've created a blend between the red and the yellow with a simple round brush that uses pen pressure for pressure sensitivity. Okay, and that is going to make it so that your opacity changes based on an extreme amount of pressure or very little pressure. And if you get really adept at using that Option key to select color, paint, select color, paint, select color, paint, and just continually do this, right? Before you know it, this will become second nature, by the way, folks. This is something that, it only takes a couple of days and you just get so used to this. But this is how you do it. You grab the color and you paint, and you grab it and you paint, and you grab it and you paint. And eventually you're going to get to this point where you start to just blend the colors really nicely, one between the next. Right, so if I just do this, I'm going to select everything outside of that. There's a little blend we just created right there. All right, now, how often do I use the hard round brush to do any of this? Never. I personally love to use the custom brushes. I love to use the brushes that are in the Adobe brush library. They have more painterly effects. There's more control. It makes it easier for me to blend and so on. But I wanted to show you this with the basic brush to show that it can be done with the simplest of brushes. And of course, depending on the kind of effect you're looking for, right, the kind of blending you want, the brush makes a huge difference, all right? So if, for example, you did want to do something really soft, all right, then you would go for one of those brushes, and again, just using one of the simplest brushes in Photoshop of them all, the soft round opacity brush. Okay, so like the hard round opacity brush, this brush allows me to control with pen pressure how dark I go, how light I go, or really, if we're being honest, how opaque the paint is. But you'll also notice that it has a softer edge. So what this allows me to do is basically make gradients with painting rather than using the gradient tool. For example, why don't we just make a triangle shape here, all right? And I'll use this nice rich blue here, and I'll paint with this brush, and then I'll use very light pressure as I move this way. Look at that nice fade. Then I'll grab a nice pink color and come in from this side, and then again use very light pressure. Okay, and there we go. Grab some blue, kind of paint over in this direction. See what we're getting there? Very, very nice. So just the brush alone makes a huge difference in how your blending is going to look. If it's going to be really fluid, really smooth, like this, or if it's going to be something that's a bit more painterly. You notice a difference. You can see a bit of like the shape of the brush marks that I'm making when I blend with that hard round brush as opposed to the soft round. All right, so those are the basics of using this method. Now let's try it with a custom brush, all right? And a good brush to use for this, and there are so many, but just to point you to, actually I point you to two of them, are in the Mega Pack. And as I always demonstrate in Brush Hour, if you are looking to get brushes to work with, the way you do it in Photoshop is you come over to the little hamburger menu, we call it, this little drop-down menu in the top right corner. And you have this option to get more brushes. And by tapping on that, it's going to open up a web page here, and it's going to give you the option to log in and grab all these many brushes. Okay, now there are about 2,000 of them for you to enjoy here. Every quarter I release new brushes for the world, and the most recent release is the Spring 2022 brushes, which were released about, I think, 3 weeks ago. maybe a month ago or so. Here you go. You just download it, and then if you double click on the file that you've downloaded, it'll be an ABR file. As long as you have Photoshop already open, you double click on it, and boom, it just installs it. If for some reason that does not happen, what you do is come here again to that same little drop-down menu, tap on that, and select Import Brushes, and then navigate to where you downloaded that file and double click on it from there, and it will install the brushes. Okay, so here in the Mega Pack in the Paint Box category, let's come over here. And here are some brushes I like to point people to for this. The Creamy and the Creamy Variation brush are very good for using this method. And if anybody's ever seen the episode I did on mixing harmonious color in digital painting, you'll note that I used one of these two brushes, okay? And the other one I like is down here in the oil category, Oil Rich, this brush right here. These brushes are quite good for this technique that I'm going to demonstrate here. Maybe I'll use the Oil Rich today. I don't use that one as frequently, but you'll see kind of how it does its thing. Actually, you know what's nice is I have an update for this brush coming in summer 2022. So the original Oil Rich brush was 80 pixels. Now, when I first started building brushes for everybody in Photoshop, people weren't working at as large a scale as they are today, simply because of hardware limitations and memory limitations. And you know, if they wanted to work on a really big file, they didn't want to deal with brush lag. So most of my brushes lived in the vicinity, like somewhere like 50 pixels to 150 pixels. And as hardware has continued to get better and more memory in machines and more power, I've started to make larger and larger brushes over the last 5 years or so. There's an update to this Oil Rich brush because it is one of the more popular brushes that I made. Coming in summer 2022, right here you have Rich Oil 22 and Rich Oil 22B. And they are the same sort of behavior and appearance and canvas texture as that original Rich Oil brush, but much, much larger. Okay, really fun to paint with these. All right, very painterly. Back to that Mega Pack. Let's come on down to that Rich Oil brush or Oil Rich brush. Okay, here we go. And I'll just demonstrate for you how this works. You saw me do this just a moment ago, and I'll do it again. Grab some red, put some color down. And notice that I can go lighter and lighter and lighter right here using less pressure. And grab the yellow, come over that more lightly there, right? And then just bear down. And then here's what I like about this brush. It's a much more sort of painterly blend of the colors there, because you can see these sort of chunky brush marks right there. Okay, now if you're not getting as much of opacity control as you need, what you do is you come over here to transfer and drop this number down. Okay, so I could bring it down to about 30% right there, and that's going to give me a lighter color when I use less pressure, like this. Okay, so now I can get more of a blend right there. But I love being able to see the brush strokes. That to me is what's exciting about this. Okay, chunk, 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 chunk. Every time you see that eyedropper pop up, you know that I'm grabbing color and I am painting with that newly selected color. All right, so now if we do that same exercise here of just getting rid of the outside bit like this, you'll see that the blend we have is a lot more painterly, okay? And I really enjoy this. And so let's just paint an apple really quickly with that creamy brush, for example, which has a very similar behavior. All right, we'll go like this. So we're just gonna outline in our apple. Here we go. And again, I'm a big fan of these more painterly brush strokes. Love them. All right, and we'll go a little darker here. And we'll put a little shadow area down here, okay? And I want to do sort of like a core shadow. I'm going to go a little cooler, a little darker here, and just throw that in there, right there. All right, now here I'm going to grab, watch this, I'm going to grab this dark color, and I'm going to paint lightly right here up against the edge of that red. See that? So I'm using less pressure, which means I'm going to get less opacity for that paint. Then I grab the red and paint into that a little bit. See that? And that just softens that edge just a hair. And whatever that new color is, I can grab that and I can paint a little bit like this. And now that edge just gets a little softer. That transition from the dark to the light gets a little softer right there. I do the same thing on this side. I can sort of paint over that core shadow just a little bit like that. Okay, see how nice that is? So we're using that same technique as we did with the hard round brush, but we're using a custom brush now. Maybe there's some reflected light of some color down here. I can use a light color, light pressure, pardon me, for this green, for example. Paint a little red over it, and then sample that new color and just kind of pop that in down there. Okay, so maybe there's something, maybe that surface that it's sitting on has a little bit of a green tint to it. So I could throw that down there and then move that color wheel and get that color right there. So that could be the surface. Okay, that's reflecting up into the skin of the apple, right? And then what I could do is add a shadow there. So I'm gonna go a little cooler, move it back this way, come down this way. There we go. And I'll throw my little shadow there. Okay. And then along the edges, just use a lighter amount of pressure there to soften that shadow here, because as you know, shadows get softer the further they move away from the source of the shadow. I'm talking about cast shadows here, right? How they behave. So they get sharper as they get closer to the thing that's making the shadow, the thing that's casting the shadow right here, which is the apple. So that'll be the darkest and the sharpest edged bit. But as we start to move away here, we get a little softer. And I'm just using that brush the same way I did with that hard round. I'm just kind of scrubbing and painting in some bits here to sort of soften that shape. Okie dokie, like that. There we go. And we want to get really dark down there, right here along this edge where there's an occlusion shadow. And then I can do the same thing again. I can sort of use a lighter amount of pressure there, sample that new color and paint that out from there. And then same thing, same thing, same thing. As the great Slidini says, same thing. Okay, grab some of that red, paint that into the shadow there. Have that reflect. Grab that new color and just kind of tint my shadow a little bit like that. These are all little tricks, you know. Okay. And then of course you'd have a lighter area up here, which you can just paint in. And you can go really sloppy with this. Just go ahead and grab it and get the general shape right there. And then, same as before, lighter pressure, lighter pressure, lighter pressure. I grab that red, grab the new color that gets created with that lighter pressure. And look, you just take those edges and soften them right away, like that. Okay, it really is a pretty simple, pretty easy process there. And I come around here, I can clean everything up. You know, we didn't bother with a highlight or anything, and that's fine. This is just a quick demo to show you how this works with the custom brushes and how I would go about doing something like this where I'm blending by using the eyedropper tool, selecting color, and then painting into it, etc., etc. Okie dokie, there you go. There you go. All right, so any questions about this? This is such a really core skill to develop if you're doing any kind of digital painting. This ability to blend using just brushes is something that you really have to get comfortable with, and it's all just part of the game. You know, as you're learning any new thing, you sort of have to learn fundamentals, and I would consider this to be a true fundamental technique in digital painting, and one worth taking some time to get comfortable with and to really sink your teeth into, and find the brushes that you like to do this with. Now I'm demonstrating with a brush that is very chunky and painterly and a little unpredictable here and there, and that suits me fine, but you know, everyone's got a different style of working, and what I don't want is for you to, you know, watch this demonstration, then pick up the creamy brush or whatever and say, this is awful, I hate it, it's not working for me. Don't fret. Grab a different brush. Grab one that's got a bit more control, like you know, some of the gouache brushes might be better suited for what you're trying to achieve. And you know, if I were to go through, and there's an acrylic brush in here, right here at the beginning, acrylics basic, okay? Brush like this might be more up your alley. See that? A little easier to understand what's going on with the paint that you're putting down, but again, you can still go lighter and lighter, just like that. Grab another color, heavy, 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 lighter, 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 lighter. Grab what's in the middle, and just kind of throw that in there like that, and blend. Right? That might be more what you prefer right there. There's that blend, okay? So up to you. Let's see. How do I get the brushes, says Crystal. Crystal, here's what you do. If you have your username and ID for your ID and your password for Adobe, which you should have an Adobe ID, come over here to your brushes panel. Okay. If you don't see it there, come over to Window, Brushes. Okay. Make sure that that's visible. And in the top of your brushes panel at the right, there's a little drop-down menu here, which will take you to this option, Get More Brushes, which will launch this page here. You will sign in with your Adobe ID, and then you will see all these brushes, and the brush that I'm using currently is in this brush set called the Mega Pack. Okay? Alrighty. So that is the first method of blending. That is the very straightforward and most commonly used method that you will see demonstrated everywhere. It's using your brush to sample colors temporarily with the eyedropper tool, thanks to the Option key or the Alt key on a PC, okay? And then from there, going ahead and making these subtle transitions from one color to another. You repeatedly sampling color and then painting, and sampling color and then painting, and sampling color, and going that way. Right, so that is the most commonly used method, and well worth your time to learn. Next, let's talk about method number 2, and this is a simple one. This is smudging, okay? And smudging is a way of blending areas together simply by blurring the pixels a little bit, okay? Now with smudging, you know, you do have to be careful, because every blend that you make, if you overblend, is going to get really smooth and look kind of like a gradient. So this depends on what you want. Now there are different smudge brushes you can use. The brush tip shape, the brush stamp that you use for the smudge tool can have an impact, of course, on what the effect will be. But with any smudge tool, the more you continue to use it over a single area, the more soft that blend will become. And so there's a little bit of a knack to it that you can get over time. But while we have this apple up here, Let's take a look, for example, at some smudging options. In the Mega Pack, you do have some options right here at the top in the paint box. For example, you have a bristle smudge, a big painty blender. All right, now the big painty blender does this. See what happens? It's taking whatever color is there and it's pulling it in the shape of what appear to be bristles of a brush, taking wet paint and just pulling it a little across your canvas or across the paper, okay? Now, if you wanted to use a smudge tool like this and you wanted a softer effect, what you would do is use a soft amount of pressure and a scrubbing action like this. See? See what I'm doing here? Soft, 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 changing direction every now and then to achieve that. And if you do it just a little, like I did there, I didn't overwork it, you can get some nice blends happening, okay? Come over here to this. Why don't we do it along the edge of the apple so you can really see a good contrast between the red and the blue. Now again, if I just pull like this with a significant amount of pressure, that is the result. But if I sort of scrubbity, 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 like this, vary the direction slightly as I go, okay, that's the result. If I were to do this though over and over and over and over and over and over, like kind of in these little circular motions and just keep on going, right? Eventually, I'm just going to get a muddy, blurry mess, and that is not my way. That is not my intention. It's not what I'm looking for. Okay, so this is something that you have to get a knack for. Of course, the brush tip shape does make a difference, right? The stamp shape. If I go to my brush settings for the smudge tool, by the way, here's the smudge tool. It's a little finger, okay? It looks like it's pointing downwards, like you're taking your finger and smudging some paint, okay? Brian, what date are the summer 2022 brushes coming out? The answer to that is most likely first week of July, okay? Here's your smudge tool. Let's take a look at the brush tip shape and let's change that now. Okay, so currently, if I just scroll through, I'll find a blue square. That's going to tell me which brush tip shape I have here. This one is Kyle's Paint Box Big Rough. We're going to move it to something that's just a sort of a soft round shape of some kind. Okay, so maybe something like this. This is a charcoal circle there. And I'll turn off the spacing for a minute. Make that smaller. Look at the difference, right? Because it's a round brush, the smudging I get is going to be round, right? Like that. The other thing that's going to affect how the smudging happens and how quickly it happens and how much gets smudged and all that is the strength of the smudging. Now you can control the strength right here, okay, with transfer, which is the same sort of how we think about opacity with regular brushes. If you think about the strength of your smudging, think about using transfer. If I bring this down to a minimum of 0, that means with light pressure I'll get very little smudging. Now look at the difference. Light pressure gives me this result. Very subtle, very soft. See that? Not much going on there. Okay? And just like brushes, you can control the size as well. So at the moment I have a minimum value of 20% of the original stamp size. Now if I turn that off, the stamp will be the same size all along. Alright, so you can see the size of the stamp right here. I can make that a little bigger. And with light pressure, this is the smudging I'm going to get. Smudging a much larger area now, okay? But with heavy pressure, I can do that. I can pull it all the way out that far. Look at that. So, lots to consider here for how you control the smudge tool. But know that the smudge tool is a great blending tool. It can be overused. You want to be careful about the stamp that you're using. There are presets you can use right here in, for example, the paint box. In the Mega Pack, you have bristle smudge. You have a new bristle smudge. You have a palette knife. This sort of works like this. It's like, you know, taking an area and just kind of pulling it like a palette knife, okay? That's kind of fun. I like being able to just pull that paint around. Another thing is you have a soft smudge option here, okay? You see what that does is it's smudging, but it's not taking all the paint with it at the same time. So you can still see the edge of that apple outline right here. See that shape right there? There's still a clear edge there that is visible, okay? So there are times when you want to do that kind of smudging. That can be very effective. The thrash blend is one I use a lot for more sort of painterly smudging, and it does this. So you can see what that does, right? It breaks apart basically the area that you're blending. It breaks it up, and then you can blend it that way, right? So some pretty interesting effects there. So this is a very popular and easy way to smudge. Now I like to have a key command for smudging set up on my keyboard, ready to go. And what I've done is I've assigned the S key to smudge. And that makes it very easy for me to be painting and then hit S and just start smudging right away, okay? Then right back to painting. Grab another color and paint. That is a really efficient way to work. If you want to set up key commands, what you want to do is, if you're on this is only on Mac. On PC, you're going to go to Edit, and you'll find keyboard shortcuts here. Mac, you go Edit, keyboard shortcuts. On PC, I think you go to, is it File or... they're not the same is all I remember. One, you'll have to hunt for this, but keyboard shortcuts. Another thing you can do is you can go to the search box for Photoshop where you want to find something, go to Help right here and do Search, okay, and do keyboard shortcuts. But here we go, Edit, keyboard shortcuts, and you have different categories, right? This is Smudge is a tool, so I have a shortcuts for tools right here. This drop down. And if I come on down to the smudge tool, right here, you'll notice that I have assigned the letter S, okay, on my keyboard for that. I use smudging a lot, so that was very useful for me, okay. Any questions about that? Let's see. I see someone mentioning the blender tool. Yeah, the blender is another way. People refer to the smudge tool often as the blender tool because really you are blending. Okay, so you may hear people say that if they're doing a demonstration, they may say blender, and what they mean is the smudge tool. Okay, don't forget the smudge tool also exists in Fresco. In fact, any brushes you load, any brushes in Fresco are automatically loaded into your smudge brush category, and you can use them as smudge tools. Very convenient. Harry asks, how do you set your favorite brushes? In Fresco, I set them by actually putting there's a little heart icon next to them, or excuse me, it's a star. If you tap on that, it adds it to your favorites. There are two ways to do it in Photoshop. One is you could create a folder. Okay, so down here, you'll notice I have a folder icon. So if I come up here to the top anywhere and I just tap folder, I can say favorites, okay, and that creates this new folder. And what I could do is take any brush and drag it into favorites and then keep them that way, but that will drag them out of their original location. If you don't want to do that, let's say for example I really enjoy using that creamy variation brush, and I do use this brush a lot. I could duplicate that brush. So when I have it selected, I just tap on the little plus sign right here, and I can say creamy brush. There it is. I could take this version of it, it's a duplicate now, and drag it up into my favorites folder like that, and there it is, okay? The second way to do this, which is totally non-destructive and probably my preferred method, is to use libraries. If you've never used libraries before, you go to Window, Libraries, okay? And you could create a folder in your libraries for favorite brushes. Popped it up over here. And here I would go to Create New Library, and we just call it Favorite Brushes, okay? And I'm just gonna make this for my personal storage. There we go, Favorite Brushes, Create. And all I have to do here is just drag things into that folder like that. And that library then, what's really cool about this is that library will A, show up automatically in Fresco as a separate brush library with all your favorites, but B, anytime you sign into Photoshop on someone else's machine anywhere in the world, your favorite brushes or your libraries of all kinds will just show up automatically. You just go to libraries and everything's still there. So it's kind of like having this little suitcase of favorite things, colors and shapes and brushes and whatnot, traveling with you all the time from machine to machine with no worries. So you could do that, just drag the brushes in there that you really like to use like that, and be in great shape, right? I can just keep doing that. And this library then is saved and ready to go. Okay. Let's look at the third method of blending. So we've covered now smudging and we've looked at blending with a brush. I want to talk now about a category of brushes that often goes overlooked, and you've heard me talk about it many times here on Brush Hour, and that is, of course, mixer brushes. Mixer brushes, if you look over here, okay, in your brush tool, I'm long tapping on this now, and it shows me there are several different sub-tools in here. You have the brush tool, you have the pencil tool, the color replacement tool, and look at this at the bottom, mixer brush tool. So the mixer brush tool allows you to mix paint on the surface, as its name states. If we go into the real oils category of the Mega Pack, you have a whole ton of mixer brushes. And if you just start with something like this bristly wet oil brush, for example, I'll show you how this works. Put some color down. Let's use a bit of a richer color than that, something a little more interesting. There we go, a little darker. Okay, put some color down. It's a nice summery color right there. Nothing fancy is happening, and if I grab another color now, here, nothing fancy is happening either. But why? Look, let's try that again. Watch what happens when I paint over here. Ah, see that? See, they're mixing. A way to think about this is it's kind of like you're taking a standard Photoshop brush and you're adding a smudge tool into it, okay, or smudge properties, right there. So of course you can imagine that this is a very good tool for mixing, and again, just like the smudge tool, it depends on the brush tip shape that you're using, right? There's so many factors that'll go into this, but let's take a look at what would happen, for example, if I went to a brush tip shape that was a little less sort of bristly, okay, and put some color down and then grab another color and mix with that. Look how pretty that is. Okay, just by changing the brush tip shape, I'm getting a completely different result with how it mixes. And this really does emulate oils and acrylics very nicely, this mixer brush tool. Look at that. Beautiful. Mixer brushes give you various controls. Let's see. Sorry, I just saw a question about libraries, but it looks like Steve is on it. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, so up here, you'll notice, and remember we said that if you have any tool selected, all your tool properties are up here. We have a mixer brush selected, so here are our properties for the mixer brush, okay? You have the wetness, okay? You have load means how much of your brush is loaded with paint. In other words, like if you can imagine the bristles on the brush, maybe you load like just 10% of the total amount of bristles with paint, okay? Or in this case, 100%. So it's really saturated with paint. The whole thing's gunked up with paint. The mixing value is set to 1%, okay? What that means is, so there's two things to think about here with mixing. Wetness is going to control sort of the flow of paint out of your brush, okay? If it's really, really wet, then it's going to flow freely with, and this is different from flow, but it's more like that paint is going to saturate the canvas, and whatever color is currently on the canvas, okay, it'll pick up very little of it as it passes through, right? Like this. But if I want the mixing value to be increased, I'm going to put 50%. And it'll pick up more of that green now as it passes through. So the higher that value is, the higher the amount of paint that's currently on the canvas is going to influence what you're putting down onto it. So these are things you can play with. And if all this is intimidating and weird, don't worry. You can come over here and you have presets for your mixer brushes. So you can, these are very clear cut. So you can have a totally dry brush, dry, light load of paint, heavy load of paint, right, moist all the way through, very, very wet with a heavy mix of the paint. So these are great presets to use. There's no reason to fiddle with all these sliders if you don't want to, not necessary. And even though this is not the episode where we're talking about this, it's always important to mention and point out that mixer brushes allow you to paint with multiple colors at the same time. This brush, in fact, is doing just that. If I hold down the Option key and sample this area of my canvas, you'll notice that this color swatch represents the entire area I sampled. It's not any longer just a single color, it's multiple colors. So when I paint with it, look at that. I get multiple colors in my brush stroke. So really quite a powerful thing to be able to paint in this way, and you'll get really great results. fact, you know what? I'm so happy with this brush, I'm gonna save it. Just from changing that shape, I really like the result. Pop it into his favorites here. All right, there we go. That's mixer brushes, my friends, okay? Mixer brushes. And they're method number 3 for blending, and they work very, very well. And again, try different brush shapes, try different brushes to get the result you're looking for, and I think you'll enjoy it. And for all you oil painters out there who want to emulate that look in Photoshop, I think you'd be very happy with using these, okay? Let's hide this for a moment. And why don't we now move on to the 4th method I wanted to demonstrate for you today, which is using color dynamics to mix your paint. So I'm gonna go back to a regular Photoshop brush, not a mixer brush. I have this brush called New Paint, which is, it's not in any brush set right now, but it's okay if I demonstrate with it, because maybe I should demonstrate with something that you already have access to. That's probably better. Let's do that. Let's see. We'll use, let's see. So many choices, folks. So many nice choices. So many, so many. Let's try natural feel. All right, here we go. So I'm painting with this brush. It's very nice. Let's say I want, though, to mix color with this brush, and I want to mix between a blue and some kind of like a green or something, okay? Well, here's what we do. We open up our color dynamics, okay, under brush settings. Here you go, color dynamics. Now we don't have to adjust the hue and saturation and brightness. There are already some settings there. I'm just going to slide those back down to nothing because we're not talking about mixing per stamp right now. That's what those will do. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to come up to where it says foreground and background jitter. And here we have this control. I'm going to set that to pen pressure. Okay. Now remember I said I wanted to mix between like a blue and a green. Here's where I use my background color, okay? I can do that up here, I can do that down here. I'll go to my background color, and I'm going to select a sort of a greenish kind of color here. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to mix between the blue and the green. Well, now all I have to do is go with heavy pressure to light pressure. And I'll turn off my shape dynamics, okay? So that the brush is going to be the same width all the way through the stroke, and you'll see it much more clearly. Heavy pressure, light pressure. See that? So what I'm doing is I'm using the background color when I use less pressure with my brush, and I'm using the foreground color when I use heavier pressure with my brush, more pressure with my brush. And this is not something a lot of people are aware of. So heavy, 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 lighter, 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 lightest, 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 lightest. Just like that. Okay? So this is going to be a pretty interesting way to work. Medium pressure gives me a color in between, right? Like that. Let's take our foreground color and let's do something completely different, okay, like this. So now we have sort of a purple, but as I go lighter and lighter and lighter, I get to that green. And then I come back up towards the purple and everything in between. So that can be a pretty interesting way to use a brush, okay? And you can do this with, I love doing this with watercolor brushes. In the Mega Pack, in the paint box, if you go down to watercolor fill, this is the one right here. Now because it has opacity tied to pen pressure, the background color that you use will not be as clearly rendered, but you can work around that, and I'll show you in a moment what I mean. But let's use a foreground color here of a really deep dark blue. And we'll use a background color of much like a more lemony kind of a yellow-green, okay? And foreground color, here we go. And then we're gonna go to background color with the green, okay? So how do I do it? Somebody in the audience tell me, what do I do? Brush settings and go where? Color dynamics. And then control, pen pressure, and now what happens? Not seeing much of a change there. Why is that? Bring the flow up. Go to your opacity settings for transfer. Bring that up. Look at that. See? It's like magic. It's like doing a watercolor variegated or graded wash. Okay? I think, is variegated the word I'm looking for? Where you go from one color to another. Graded could just be any old color just going to a lighter version of that color. Variegated, I think, means color to different color. Help me with my watercolor vocabulary, if you will, folks, if you will. Now, you'll notice, of course, that this color is not as saturated, and the reason for that is because of transfer properties. If I turn transfer off altogether, I can use very light pressure to get that color, and then heavier and heavier and heavier and heavier, all the way to that purple, and get lighter colors in between and all kinds of stuff. The brush mode is set to multiply. Every successive stroke is going to add paint until it gets darker. Go ahead and change that to normal if that suits what you're trying to do better. You can always change your brush mode. All these brushes are infinitely customizable to suit whatever it is you're trying to do, folks. And then lighter again. Look at that. What a cool effect. Imagine, you know, doing some kind of like neat lettering with this or something, you know, just kind of varying the pressure as you go. And like that. Isn't that cool? Zoom in so you can see how nice that looks. So this is the option to use color dynamics to blend. It's a very unique way of doing this. And I recommend that you try it with different kinds of brushes. Right now I'm playing with that color fill brush, but you know, go to something funny like this fence painter brush. Okay, that's got kind of a weird sort of a look to it, right? Turn on your color dynamics. Keep that pen pressure locked on there. And let's go to our settings for transfer. Remember, transfer is going to make a huge difference, okay? In our shape dynamics, we'll pull those up. There we go. And now I can do stuff like this. Right? Change the flow to a much lower value if you want to have more subtle transitions as you go. Okay? What do you think about that, gang? Pretty cool, huh? Here are 4 ways for you to blend your color. That is how we're doing it today. So we talked first about using your brush, sample some color with the eyedropper, using the option key, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth to make your blends. Do it with a painterly brush, see what happens, okay? Do it with a big soft round brush for a softer transition. Then we talked about smudging. Try using different brushes for smudging. Try changing the settings for your smudging, okay? Using transfer, all right? And the strength settings. Then we talked about mixer brushes right here. And last but not least, we talked about using color dynamics. So there are 4 ways for you to blend, and each of them has its own strengths, its own interesting properties, and these are really fun to play with. Thank you, Steve. Variegated is the word I was looking for. Thanks for helping me with my vocabulary. All right, gang. Well, thank you for being with me today. I apologize. I'm very emotional about what's happening right now in the States, but we were able to get through the show and learn some cool stuff, and I hope you will all please go out and try these things and find what works for you and works for your style. Everybody's different, but it's good to know about what's possible and good to know about what your options are, okay? Photoshop's huge. It's just a massive program, massive. And you're always uncovering stuff that you didn't know was there. I myself, having used it for 25 years or whatever it is now, probably know about 10% of what it can do. So that just goes to show you, it's pretty crazy. Take care of yourselves, take care of each other. Remember, please, to be kind, and I will say ciao for now.